This week on the Men at the Movies podcast, we close out our summer blockbuster series with the movie E.T. This is a story of wonder, how the impossible comes to what we think is ordinary and colors the whole world differently. We find that when the supernatural touches your life, the impossible manipulates the environment and changes everything. But if we allow ourselves to stop worrying and connect to a life of mystery, mess, and miracles, we find that the impossible becomes possible. Join us as we discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being. Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name's Paul McDonald, and joining me in the room, 5 feet or less from me, Britt Mooney. Hey, Britt, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. We're not social distancing, right? I mean,
No, that's
we're pretty
over.
Close.
We're in South Carolina, so they don't
care about that here.
So we are closing out our summer blockbuster series. We saved the best for last. We saved
For
E.T.
sure.
And we're going to talk all about this and how much we love this movie. But my family and I came down to a lake in Anderson, South Carolina. It's on Lake Hartwell, one of the biggest lakes in the South. And I'm like, hey, dude, it's like halfway between Charlotte and Atlanta. Why don't you guys come up? And through all these circumstances, it ends up being Britt and his son Micah. Micah's hanging out on the bed in this guest room. And so we're here. We're going to go out on the boat and maybe throw Micah like in his jeans.
Probably not. My wife would probably not appreciate that.
Your car might not appreciate
for an hour and a half. It's only an hour and a half, though. I mean,
nice.
It was like an hour and a half of a drive. It really wasn't that bad. It was really nice. So
it helps you're on the north. On the other side, it'd be like 4 hours because
it would have.
Atlanta is about a 2-hour city.
It is now.
At least.
When I was younger, it wasn't because I'm old. But in the olden days, olden days, you could get pretty much anywhere in Atlanta from anywhere else in suburban Atlanta in 45 minutes tops.
Yeah.
Now that's like 45 minutes is down the street.
That gets you out of your neighborhood.
That gets me out of
So we're wrapping up our summer blockbuster series. We've been talking about alien movies. What did we hit? We hit Independence Day. We hit Aliens.
Mm-hmm.
We hit Men in Black.
Yep.
We did Avatar with Patrick. And now we're closing it out strong. Like I said, with one of the best movies, full stop.
Yeah.
Not that I'm going to full stop. I'm going to keep going. One of the best movies we've probably ever done from a writing, creativity, the way they executed it. And because it's so well done, we don't have any clips today because this movie is all show, don't tell moments. It's all visual. It's all to a certain degree audio because of John Williams' score. John Williams, his music told you what to feel about certain scenes and certain people, just like he does with Star Wars. Where, in Star Wars, each of the characters had their own theme music. It's Leia and like when Darth Vader, for sure, when characters entered the scene, music would play. So you'd know that colored your experience of them. And E.T. was just the same way.
Well, and E.T. is Spielberg at his best, which basically means
that's a pretty high bar considering the other stuff Spielberg's done.
And this really was the era, I would say 10 to 15 years where Spielberg just like
Played.
He could almost do no wrong. He could just take any story in any movie and put it through his ringer sort of thing. And he was always good at that sort of storytelling, whether it was, and he loves aliens, by the way, he really loves aliens. But whatever the movies he makes, he's not big into dialogue. Not that they don't have dialogue, but they're not dialogue heavy movies. They really are show, don't tell, lighting, visual.
We're going to talk about the lighting and the visuals were just incredible.
So this is just And it is one of the best movies that we've even done on the podcast easily, just because we've done some great movies but this is one of the perfect ones. This is one of those movies where you get to the end, and as a writer and as you're really like, looking at it and analyzing it, you get to the end and you're like, When Harry Met Sally or one of those, you're like, that's a perfect movie. They literally did not make one mistake in the whole movie.
Right.
Like there's just nothing.
Yeah. They because so many movies have the narrative exposition, and you've heard me talking about this a lot lately, bugging me when I see it, when I don't see it in a movie like this, where they're telling you what's going on. They're telling you how to feel, where they're like, no, this is why I did this. You don't need that knowledge. And what you see is people just acting, and you know how the mom feels, not by anything she says, but by how she acts, by the fact
reacts.
that, that throwaway line by Ellie. It's like, oh yeah, Dad's not here. Like, why don't you call your dad? He's in Mexico with Sally because their parents had just divorced. And you see her reaction. She doesn't tell you how she felt. She shows you how she feels. And like you said, the other kids show like, you idiot, what are you doing?
Well, it gets really quiet. I mean, it's just all of those elements to that movie, just how, like I said, there's no mistakes in it. And it's well acted, and it really doesn't have a lot of big stars in it. Like, I know Drew Barrymore later becomes a star, kind of.
Probably in spite of this, considering all just the challenge of being Macaulay Culkin's always the Home Alone kid. Yeah. It doesn't matter. All the becomes stuck. Like even Daniel Radcliffe's Harry Potter.
Yeah. Well, he's Weird Al now. I don't know if
he's Weird Al.
He's going to be Weird Al on the Weird Al biopic in the Weird Al movie. So.
Which you want to do UHF. You just, speaking of Weird Al, that might be the next movie we do.
And for Spielberg, just the lighting and I'm just going to go, here's my hot take. Here's my first hot take. Here's my first.
We should have a hot take sound.
I think he learned better how to do this when he made Jaws. So if you don't know the story of Jaws, is they had the mechanical shark and they were going to show the shark a lot, but then the shark broke. Like the mechanical shark broke down. It
looked terrible.
And it looked terrible.
Obviously fake.
And so instead he had to get creative and just show the fin and use the music. And that ends up being more effective because it's a little more visual. You have to see what everyone else is.
That movie's why Micah's not jumping in the lake today.
Right. And so all of that to say is you kind of see some of that same thing with E.T., although he probably had the money for the special effects. He probably had any budget he wanted by the time he made E.T., but you still what a great scene with just him and a ball and light coming from a shed. Like, what did you need? Like, it's just, but it was effective. And so it's just a master at work.
Yes. I watched this movie and I almost wanted to go back and watch it just to take notes of what he did and the effectiveness and how it told the story with precision and emotion. And one of the things we're going to start talking about sort of the depth and the layers of the movie here as a story, but this idea of wonder, of childlike, and told both from the Elliot's eyes, but also E.T. So many cool, especially the one where you're seeing from the ghost costume, where your camera's actually looking through the eye holes. But that idea of experiencing the world in childlike wonder again. And this movie, this is one of the movies I remember seeing in the theater. So my first two I remember are Empire Strikes Back and E.T. Apparently we're going in alphabetical order starting. But I remember being in Savannah at the mall and we go see it. And with those two movies being the first ones I saw, well, no wonder I love talking about movies.
It's all downhill from there, dude.
Right. But and again, when we start looking at, well, how does this movie draw us closer to God? Where do we see truth in this movie? And it's one of the things we've talked about, I think, through this blockbuster series of reawakening the wonder, even going back to Sandlot, childlike wonder, this enjoyment of simple things of the sensual pleasures, whether it's looking up at a starry sky or playing catch or having s'mores or jumping in the lake or just having fun for fun's sake, for play's sake. And that's that in each of the 3 kid characters, you see that wonder and excitement and just simple joy.
Right. Well, it's the impossible being revealed within a world of just what you think is ordinary, but it colors everything differently now. Like just this one impossible thing happening now changes your whole perspective on everything. And that is the gospel, by the way. But
we might be talking about how the impossible enters in and changes our story.
but and just to kind of go back just for a quick second on the light aspect of this movie, I think there's a lot of symbolism with how Spielberg used light. He was very intentional. There was as shadows and where the light's coming from and who's in the light. Like I just remember there was one scene where Elliot literally comes up to a lamp and makes a statement, but like he's looking up into the light when he makes, it was almost like this awakening moment that he had. But you see that throughout the film where there's darkness and then where's the light coming from? What does the light symbolize? And coming into, awareness and the big reveal of seeing E.T. was by a flashlight and it goes from dark to immediate light. And I just think there were a lot of symbols within that. I think Spielberg was also using that tool to help us to get into the movie. So because music is one thing, visuals another. And that's what a great filmmaker does, is uses all of those tools to bring you into a story. And you're feeling things and you're engaged in something and you're even learning things you may not even be realizing. Why is this affecting me so much? Because you could call it manipulative if you want, but it's just using all of those tools to bring that story to life. And so light was one of those ways that he did that. But it is a story of wonder. It is a story. There's some moments where there's a little scariness to it here and there, but it is a story of wonder, like that Peter Pan element that they talk about in the actual script. And she's reading Peter Pan to Gertie, the little girl. So that's pretty obvious nod where they're flying in front of the moon and the whole thing. It's a pretty obvious nod for Peter Pan, but that's what Peter Pan's about, right? Wonder. Like if it's not just a story, you can fly. You can now be a part of an adventure. And that's a big part of it.
Well, and that's a great question. When we look at this movie is when you talk about Peter Pan, and I think specifically when you look at Elliot, of this resistance to growing up is because of the assumption of what growing up means.
Good. And
growing up in his world is like, no, it's boring. It's job. It's paying bills. It's yard work and fixing the house. And if that's what yard work does. And for Elliot, his yard work or his problem. And it's interesting when you see, as we start overlaying some of the gospel messages that we see in this movie, Elliot's lost his father, basically. All the kids have, but we're seeing this movie primarily through the eyes. And his dad is in Mexico with Sally, and he hates Mexico. Why is he there? But then see that feeling of abandonment, of not knowing his place in the world, of wanting, I thought it was such a powerful scene when he dressed E.T. up in his dad. Again, show, don't tell. He's showing that Elliot is now attaching to E.T. in a father. Like he sees him sort of filling that hole that his father had when he left. Which again, if we're talking about how does this apply to us, we all have these father-shaped holes in our hearts, in our lives, because we look around, we're going around. Even if you had a great physical father, that's always plan B. Plan A is our heavenly father. who we couldn't actually get to without Jesus, which is the story of the gospel, which is really what we're going to be diving into over the next 45 minutes or so.
Is that all we got?
Yeah.
Is there not going to be a part 1 and part 2?
It depends on how long we talk.
Well, and one of the really important things to get into is it is such a story of wonder. And if we're going to talk about the impossible reaching into our world and what that does to us, I've said for a long time, this is how God showed it to me or kind of revealed it to me, is this is why stories of the impossible are important, because that gives us hope. We need hope. We live. I
don't know what you're talking about. This world is a bright, shiny, hopeful place.
They're so nice to each other all the time. You have Elliot's a middle kid. Spielberg just throws Elliot under every bus. Like, he's getting picked on at school. He's doesn't do well in school.
You're like, no, you can't play Dungeons and Dragons.
Right. He can't even play Dungeons and Dragons. We
didn't even talk about the connection with Stranger Things.
Oh, yeah.
We're not even going to get into that.
But he's a middle child. He's fatherless. They're not necessarily wealthy. He's not popular, yada, 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 yada. They just keep throwing him under the bus. And his life is not one of hope necessarily. It's just getting the pizza and then now he's given a hard time for just getting a pizza. Like, they're setting it up. But here's what a story of wonder does. By the end of the movie, those problems are forgotten. It's not because the problems don't exist, but when the mom looks at her son hugging E.T., she's not thinking about where the guy is. That's what the gospel does. That's why we got to talk about the gospel. I'm not saying we don't enter into people's lives where they are, but we have to talk about the impossible as possible, because it doesn't mean that our problems aren't real, but it puts our problems in the proper perspective. Like, oh, now we can be a part of a bigger story. Like, that means something. It doesn't mean that it still doesn't hurt that the dad left. It just means that, but now I get to be a part of something even bigger. And you see that throughout the movie, and you mentioned it, how it brought people together, but it really was that awe and wonder. And that's why God, throughout the New Testament and Old Testament, he's like, just come to me, look at me. Like, because then you will feel that awe and wonder. You'll see how big this is, instead of being mired in this day-to-day stuff where we feel stuck, where we feel hopeless a lot of times because you're doing the same laundry and the same things every day,
Yeah. It's that idea, when Peter walks on the water, it's when his eyes are on Jesus, he's good. He starts seeing the waves, not so good, starts sinking. And it's the same thing for us. Talking that line, don't sweat the small stuff.
Right.
And it's all small stuff.
Right. Isn't that a bumper sticker?
Probably. Bumper sticker theology.
That should be a podcast.
But I love that imagery, because it's so easy to get stuck in that laundry, day to day, chauffeuring the kids around, doing the things, and to forget that we are part of a larger. And that's that idea, because we talk about that sort of thing a lot. We talk about larger story, bigger picture, sort of capitalized letters, larger story concept. But I think it's really hard to see it, when your head is down, just looking at this next step on the path that you're taking. You're just like, I can't even look up. I can't see I took my son out yesterday, my 19-year-old, and the thunderstorm had just rolled through, like 8:30, sun's setting. Everything's completely still. There's a chill in the air. Driving out in the boat, got his head on the phone. Dude, stop looking at your phone, because you're missing this. Like, just the fact that I'm not sweating my butt off for 5 minutes in South Carolina.
That's a little bit of impossible.
That's a miracle. And it's like, and I love that time of day, lakes completely still, and the clouds. It's darkening, but it's not dark. And it was gorgeous. Yeah. But I was like, you're missing it. And I think we as adults, because we think if we look up, we're going to miss it, because what we see is, going back to that Peter Pan concept, we see all the stuff that sucks about being an adult. We're like, oh, I got to do this, got to do this, got to do this. But then where's the wonder in the moment? Miss it.
Yeah. A great example of that from the movie, and we were talking about it before we started recording, was when the mom comes home and Gertie's been playing with E.T. and she's like, hey, Mom. And I wrote it down like, she doesn't see E.T. the whole time.
Right.
Like E.T. is in the room.
Yeah.
An alien from another world is in the room, and Gertie is trying to talk to her mother about this. She's like, yeah. Well, I got to put the dish. I
want to introduce you to the man from the moon.
I want to introduce you to the man from the moon. And but I think you killed him, right? Because she hits him with the refrigerator door. But again, show don't tell. Right. What does that scene tell us? Is that we can get so wrapped up in the minutia of life. Not that you don't need to get groceries. We need to eat. Like,
yeah,
this stuff needs to happen. But seek first the kingdom. Like, you're a part of a bigger story. And one of the things that I love to talk to people about is this thing, because I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think sometimes we think, well, that's for the dreamers and the philosophers and the poets and the like for the creative
the
types.
Rainbow Connection.
La 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 la. No, is like, it's for the pastors to think about the big picture. I got junk to do. I got work to go to. I got, like, they can sit around and read the Bible all day. I got stuff to do.
Got yards to mow. I got bills to pay. I got
and
managers to please. Yeah.
But Jesus didn't say seek first the kingdom of God, and the things you worry about, you shouldn't worry about. Like, instead of worrying about what you're going to eat and wear, that's actually what unbelievers do. That's the curse. That's you participating in the curse when you worry about that. He was talking to poor people, half of which were probably illiterate. And he's saying, you get to be a part of the revolution. Like, pay attention to that. Like seek that kingdom, that heavenly kingdom, and his righteousness, doing what's right in relationship to that revelation of what the kingdom of heaven is, bringing heaven to earth by how you act. And then God will take care of the other stuff. And again, that's what you see in the movie, is that by the end, there's so much awe and wonder, is that it's like, what does all this other stuff matter? You know?
And what you just said, I think, that's what the pagans do. They worry about what they're going to eat, what they're going to wear, all this stuff. But seek first the kingdom. And Jesus says this, and I'm going to probably frustrate some people here in a minute. But when you think about it, he's saying, what can you can't add a minute to your life. You can't grow taller by an inch. You can't become taller just by wishing or worrying it. What can you accomplish by worrying? He's like, tomorrow has enough problems on its own. And that's when he says the seek first the kingdom. And what does, I think James says, right? James or Peter says, cast your cares on him.
Right.
Where we think of sin, we think of pride, we think of lying, we think of infidelity, we think of all this stuff. What if worry is a sin? Because the way Jesus talks about it, basically by worrying, you're saying, I don't trust God to be God.
And you're saying he knows but doesn't care. Because that's another thing Jesus says. Like, Jesus says, God, your Father in heaven knows you need this stuff. And he loves you. He loves you.
Which one of you, if you ask for bread, will give him a rock, or fish, and he'll give you a serpent? Like, if you who are evil give good. If you who are evil give good gifts to your children, how much more will your heavenly Father give to you?
Look at the sparrows. Look how beautiful they are. Look at the flowers. He's aren't you worth more to God than them? Like, he's not saying that the sparrow and the flower doesn't have any worth. He's saying you have more. You're made in his image. You are eternal. Don't you think he knows and cares? That's what you're saying when you worry. When you worry, you are saying, number one, you're saying, I can provide for myself, which you can't. Number two, you're saying that God knows, but either God doesn't know or he knows and he doesn't care. And it's really up to me.
And if you believe a lie, that any more than lying, I mean, I like if you're thinking from a logical standpoint, believing something that you know to be a lie is the same as telling a lie.
Well, a lie is at the root of every sin. There's a lie at the root of every sin, which is why it's really important that we remember that you shall know the truth and the truth will make you free, right? Because righteousness is based on knowing the truth, on being one with and having the revelation of the truth. That's where righteousness comes from. It doesn't come from me choosing to do what's right. It's from me aligning my thoughts according to what's real. But at the root of it was a lie, beginning in the garden and continuing on until now. That's what Jesus said. He was a liar from the beginning.
Father of lies.
Father of lies.
You know, it's that thing. You know when the devil is lying? Because his lips are moving. And we listen to so much of this. And I want to go back because you mentioned the sparrows and the flowers. Flowers is a really important key piece of this movie because as we talk about as a piece of the gospel, miracles are happening.
Yeah.
Dead comes to life.
Yeah.
Cut finger. All these things.
Oh, and that's another way this movie is like the gospel story, but we'll get there.
But I wanted to talk about because this idea that what you see is it's not that those things are unimportant. And we see that in this movie too, because of their connection. Elliot's going to school. They're about to dissect some frogs.
I love it.
But because of their connection, their union, basically, it's like, no, these frogs have value. All life has value.
Well, specifically, what does he say to the frogs when he lets them go? Go back to your home. He says, go back to the river, go back to the woods, go back to your home. But he was connected with E.T. What was E.T. feeling? Where did E.T. want to go? Back to his home, right? So it's that connection.
Whoa. You're saying we have this longing to go home? Is that what?
but I'm saying specifically in that scene, Elliot was acting from a connection with E.T. It wasn't like, well, people tell me in order to be nice, I should set frogs free and send them home. It wasn't a moral obligation, it was a moral choice, but the moral choice was based on a connection to a person, which from another world that opened his eyes to say, oh, and I don't even know if he realized that's exactly what he was doing, but I wrote that down too in my notes because Elliot says, go back to the river is great. Right. And he's drunk and stuff too, which is funny, but again, that's the same way for us. Like if we're going to change the way we behave, it has to come from a change in our focus. It has to come from a change of revelation and who and what we're connected to, which is why the Lord's Prayer starts out, our Father who art in heaven, where are you? You're our Father, right? It's all about where it comes from. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now I get to ask for food. Now that I've aligned everything to reality, now I can ask, feed me, please. Yeah. Like I get kind of hungry, now. And
in a lot of ways, that's just more us recognizing where, in fact, every dollar comes. Like, absolutely. When we give tithe, what I'm realizing is 100% of it's yours. You've just asked for 10% back to reinvest in the kingdom, to put first the kingdom.
Put first the kingdom as a symbol.
Right.
That it's really all his anyway.
Right. It's a way of stating who are you really
trusting in.
Yeah. Where is your allegiance lie?
Yeah.
Are you trusting yourself and your financial bank account? Or are you trusting God who gave you the job, who keeps you healthy, keeps you in work, who does all these things? And so, yeah, you're doing this anyway. So this whole thing, the interesting thing, and I think this is kind of the gateway back to the conversation about the gospel. But this idea of the union, E.T. and Elliot are somehow unified. They talk with each other. They communicate with each other. They know something about each other, to the point Elliot even says, but we are sick.
Right. Yeah.
And it's interesting towards the end, which I think the scariest scene is E.T. white and face up in the river. But he's just like, that freaked me out when I was 7. It freaked me out a little even at 47. but in order for Elliot to live, E.T. had to die.
Mm-hmm.
There had to be that separation. Because they were both going downhill. By the way, that code they ran on E.T. as they do as he's dying and all this, it was very, very accurate, very medically correct. They did a lot of things that they would actually, it looked like what happens in the hospital.
Oh.
All the chaos, all the yelling.
Yeah.
Except not an alien, as far as I know. As far as I'm allowed to tell. I might have gotten flashy thingied.
Did you sign an NDA at some point?
Yeah. I can't tell you. That's part of the NDA. Oh no. But this idea that the union, and when you look at what came to do gospel, he talks about union. He talks about John when he's getting ready to go to the cross, and he's thanking the Father for being in him. And then he's like, I am in them and you are in me in them. It's like we're walking around with God in our hearts. Is the thing I've been saying is the temple is now in our hearts. If you look at the Old Testament version of the temple, that's where God rests. That's where the glory of God was. And we don't hear that frequently, that for the believer's heart, your heart is now the temple of God. And that doesn't mean like you need to watch what you're doing. It doesn't mean you need, I gotta curb my behavior because of what you had said earlier. It's not trying to make a stone heart beat. You're trying to make a good heart, a heart where the glory of God rests, do what it's designed to do. And it's not, there is some discipline to it, but it's not like people are like, oh, I need to do this. I need to do this. It's like they make these fences. They're grownups, right?
Yeah.
It's work, it's duty, it's obligation, it's tasks. What the kingdom is, what the gospel is, it's union with God.
Yeah.
And he gives you entirely new desires to pursue that kingdom.
Well, that's the discipline. There is a discipline, but that's the discipline. The discipline is, are you in him? Are you with him? Are you walking by the Spirit? There's now, therefore, no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And he qualifies what that means. What does it mean to be in Christ Jesus, our Lord? Those who walk by the Spirit and not by the flesh. In other words, it's a very simple discipline. Because
worry is by the flesh.
Worry is by the flesh. So the measure, the fruit is what we do. So they will be known by their fruit. You can, right? If someone does something that's wrong, right, you don't get to say, God told me to do that. I'm just sorry. That's obvious, right? No.
God told me to beat my kid.
No, he didn't. But at the same time, there's a whole wide range of possibilities, even within righteousness, of what you can do, of what God might lead you to do. And so it might look like it looks moral. It looks like a decision, like you will decide, but the root of it is, the discipline at the root of it is my eyes are on him. Like you said with Peter in the water, walking on water, my focus is him. Am I in him? Am I resting in him? Am I trusting in him? Where's my trust? Those are the questions that you examine yourselves, right? To see, am I still in the faith? Which a lot of people are like, well, yeah, I go to church. Like, no, examine yourself, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Like, who am I trusting and where am I trusting? But it is interesting that, again, there's so many, we should probably just kind of maybe start from the beginning at some point and go through just how this movie basically steals the story of the gospel.
All right.
Like it, I'm not saying steal as if like it's a bad thing, but from beginning to end, it basically follows the story of Jesus. And just to tell people, the gospel is a story. It isn't simply a set of doctrines. There are doctrines that are part of the gospel, but the four gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were stories. They were narratives to say, this is what happened. And this is a story of what happened. And what did Jesus call them? You are my witnesses. Now, they needed the Holy Spirit to continue to be a witness, but part of it was like, you saw what happened. You need to go tell people what happened, and they took that very seriously, obviously throughout Acts and church history. And so when I say that ET is like the gospel, I mean specifically the story of the narrative of Jesus's life from arriving from another world and then coming not to authorities who were looking for him. Just like with Herod,
Keys was saying, I had an experience. I've been looking for him since I was 10.
But it starts with this being coming from another world and coming here, but not revealing himself to authorities. He reveals himself to the innocent, to the child at heart, to the broken, to the fatherless. Like, he chooses, and Elliot says this throughout the movie, he came to me. Like, think about that.
Over and over.
Over and over, he says this. He came to me. Like the woman at the well. He came to me. He came to me. He could have come to anybody else in the whole wide world, but he came to me. And that's the amazing thing about Jesus, is that's how he makes everybody feel. But when Jesus came, he wasn't a priest. He wasn't the high priest. He wasn't a scribe. He wasn't a Pharisee. He wasn't like, he starts talking and they're like, what school did this guy go to? Where did he come from? Oh, Nazareth? What, can anything good come out of Nazareth? But he didn't. And he talks about like, blessed are you because God didn't reveal this to the wise and the rich and the wealthy. He's giving it to you. And not because of how good you are, but because you were committed and you stuck with me and suffer don't keep the kids away. This is the kingdom.
Unless you're like a child.
Unless you're like a child.
Can't enter the kingdom.
I wrote down that it takes the innocence of a child to discover something new. It takes the innocence of a child to discover something new. It's not about being naive necessarily, because Elliot wasn't naive. I wrote that down too. Elliot wasn't naive, just like James and John and those guys weren't necessarily naive. But with the wonder, they had to learn. But Elliot says they're just going to cut him up. If they find him, they're just going to cut him up. Right?
Because he knew the frogs.
He knew,
yeah.
Well, there's the frogs, but it's just, this is how the world works. The world's broken. And we know that these people in authority aren't always who they should be. And if they get a hold of Jesus, like the wise men, right? Don't go back to Herod. He says
they'll find you, they'll cut him up.
If they find him, they'll cut him up.
Or even the disciple, go back there, we're going to die.
Right. And at some point he chooses.
Right.
That's where I got to go. But just from that beginning and as you get into it, their communication has to start happening. It just starts with simple words. It starts out with, but then the message is revealed, which is, I'm from a different world. I'm from somewhere else. I'm not from here. And that brings the kids together. Just like, I'm sorry, you've got a tax collector, the guy who worked for the oppressor.
Right.
And then you've got the Simon the Zealot,
right,
who was the social justice warrior.
Basically a terrorist.
Basically a terrorist fighting against the system. You had one guy who worked for the system and one guy who was willing to kill to be free of the system.
Probably targeted taxpayers in his mission.
And Jesus brings them together. He says, come to me. Like, this is it. Like that. There's so much wonder that those two extremes, it is not that they don't exist. is that they're
No, there's no extremes. What are you talking about?
is that they're able to find unity in that. It's such a much bigger story that now you can find unity in it. That the tax collector doesn't have to become a social justice warrior, and the social justice warrior doesn't have to become a tax collector, but they both have to become like heaven. And but you see that with the older brother who's just always yelling at him, and he's promised me, swear to it, as your brother, I'm the one in charge.
You have the power, yes.
and then with Gertie too, like
going to play in Elliot's room.
He
That's weird.
He brings these people together, and he ends up bringing, by the end of the movie, he ends up bringing
Dungeoners, the Dungeons and Dragons kids,
the Dungeons and Dragons kids, the who I call the Nicodemus character, Keys, who I think he's like the Nicodemus who's part of the system, but he really has a heart for the kingdom and a heart for something real and childlike, because he talks about himself as a child. Like this is, it brings out the childlike in him and the mom. It brings all these different characters together, the wonder of this thing. And E.T. does miracles. He heals people. I mean, I'm just saying, like, as I started to see this as I was watching the movie this last time, I was like, that's Jesus. He's healing people. He's moving stuff around, and he's connecting with people beyond the physical. And there's just so much to it. But the main message is this is temporary. I'm going away. I'm not going to be here forever. And, and then because the supernatural can't last very long here. It wasn't meant to be here. It was meant to redeem what's here, but not. Oh, and like you said, the flowers bloom, and the scientists asked the question: are you saying he was able to manipulate his own environment? I loved that line. That's what Jesus did. Jesus manipulated his own environment. He was like, no, the environment doesn't manipulate me. I manipulate the environment. That's a sign that you're from another world. There's so much to it. We can stop there and talk about any of that, but it's just like, as we go through the movie, there's just so much.
And I wanted to focus in on that piece where the supernatural comes in and changes, manipulates the environment. That was the scene that people love from Chosen. All I know is I was one way.
Right.
I met Jesus and everything is changed. Because back to that idea of worry and putting first the kingdom. If I've got a heart of stone, or throughout the Old Testament, really, if I have a heart of stone, we flip this around. If I have a heart of flesh, putting first the kingdom is actually easy. It comes more naturally. I find life from it. It's almost like a one of those flywheels, but like the more you do it, the more you want to do it, and just sort of the momentum increases. If I don't, it's impossible. We try, because that you had mentioned the eyes on Peter with his eyes on Jesus. If my eyes are on Jesus, walking on the waves is easy. If they're not, it's impossible. But we try to do the impossible without looking at Jesus, and we get frustrated because we're like, no, I'm trying to do this, but it's because we're trying to do it in our way, in our fashion. But we look to the external, we look at the other things to try to manipulate the environment. Yep. To go back to that phrase, we're like, oh, I want to escape. They're running from the cops, or they're doing this. But the only thing that happens, escape is impossible unless E.T. lifts them above the cops.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the tension that we experience. The life that we want is impossible. But it's not just possible, but it's natural, and it pulls us. And it was easy. They're up there on their bikes floating in the air. That was easy for them compared to running through the neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And that's what life is. When we live a life with union with Christ, the more we find ourselves in union with him, life actually becomes easier. Whereas if we try it without him, it's impossible.
Yeah. Well, another one of Jesus's quotes, right? Because it was talking about the rich man and the eye of a needle and all that stuff. But they're like, well, then who can be saved? And Jesus says, well, with man, it's impossible.
Right.
With your strength.
Not enough sacrifice, not enough.
There's not enough. You can't kill enough bulls to make this happen. Like you can't kill enough sheep. You can't be clean enough and scrub your skin enough. Like you can't do enough. But with God, he just doesn't say salvation is possible. He says all things are now possible. And that's part of that story too. Like we go like with Alan Arnold, like that's what he's inviting us into, this other story. And when you start to participate in that other story and you start hang on around.
Because I want you to expand into this, because what is his story one that Elliot could have chosen that would have led to a lesser story?
He would have reported the alien, or he could have not
waited out, not gone to the Reese's Pieces trail.
Gone to the Reese's Pieces.
He could have done a lot of things that normal kids, people, human beings do that would have been.
Yeah.
Right. There's nothing out there. Must be a coyote.
Yeah.
And he leaves it at that.
Oh, they're making fun of me. Maybe I didn't see anything.
Right.
But he holds on to no, I saw something. Oh, it wasn't whatever.
Because when the supernatural touches your life, possible changes and manipulates the environment.
And he does participate in it. Like the Reese's Pieces he's like, come on, man. I want more of that.
Right.
It awakened something within me. That, not the TV, not the pizza, not the Dungeons and Dragons, not something of everyday life, but something touching me from another
The rest
world.
of it didn't matter.
The rest of it didn't
and it just
matter.
mattered was E.T.
I got but he didn't know what it was, who
Right.
it was. I mean, he just
Right. Even at that stage, he hasn't met him yet.
All he knew was, I got to see what this is about. Are you going to leave me too? Jesus says. And I said, where else can we go? Like, what else is there? Like, you're trying to compare heaven with this world. Like, yeah, it's hard, but what else we got, man?
And that's what we do. We look for life in all these places. We look for life in work, with our kids, even with our marriage, in church, in ministry. You look for life in all these other places, and all you do is find yourself empty.
Yeah.
Because without him, it's not hard. It's impossible. But with him, life is not only possible, you can't stop. Like Jeff Goldblum, life finds a way.
Life finds a way. And it does. I have at least 2 kids to prove that. No, but
at least 2.
At least, well, but when we look at this, and that it ends up pulling all these other people into the story. Keys, it pulls him into the story, and like why didn't Keys bring all the other authorities with him at the end of the movie? Why was it just him?
Right.
Like they don't tell us. By the way, going back to your whole narrative,
you mean Dad?
But the whole narrative exposition, like at no point would we have needed a little voiceover. Aliens do this, and they didn't have to explain anything.
Right.
At no point was that ever needed. Well, these were a certain branch of the government who, we didn't need that. Right. I mean,
they're from this distant planet beyond the moon where they were simply scientists and had nothing to be feared. They're a non-warlike.
But and one of the things I saw this time too was at the very beginning of the movie, you see what life is like on the ship. And the plants look different, and the environment's different. Like it's a different. He's showing us it's a different world. Even on the ship, it's a different world.
And even by the fact that how do they communicate with the red,
with their
glowing heart?
Again, it's light. Again, there's symbolism within the light was coming from the heart, and that's how they were communicating with one another. But just like he kind of warns E.T. Well, he doesn't warn, but Jesus warns that he's not long for this world. And he literally is, his death leads to life because, E.T., as E.T. is dying, then Elliot is sick too. But see, that's what Jesus did. Jesus entered a dying world and died with it. He literally died with the world and chose to do that. And through that death, there was life that was given to us, and it's very biblical, right? And so, but you see that with E.T. And then there's grief. Like they put him in a coffin. They put him in a not a cave, but a tomb almost looking thing. And they have grief. And Elliot says, I'll always believe. Like, why would he say that?
Harkening back to Peter. Do you believe in fairies?
Do you believe in
gotta
fairies?
clap your hands.
Clap your hands. And then just when you think the story's over, you get a little hint of the flower, right? Well, wait a minute. Oh, maybe they're coming. They're coming. Like it's happening.
Phone home. He's like, quiet, E.T., quiet.
and then you literally have death and resurrection because they declared him dead. The scientists.
Yeah. Time of death.
Time of death. They declared him dead. Then they tried hard. And I wrote that down too, is that it doesn't matter how hard we try, is that we can't bring what's dead to life. I don't care how great.
Good. In our own effort, it's impossible.
But what it took was that reconnection with another world for E.T. to bring him to life. And then it's just like the ascension at the end of the Gospels. They take him back to the nature, to the woods. I mean, there's so much symbolism in what's going on. And he commissions them. And then E.T. commissions them at the end, especially Elliot. And his commission to Gertie is be good. Like, that's a great commission. Like, go out, do the things I've taught you. Like, be good. Okay, she says. and then also to the older brother, he says, thank you, which I thought was awesome. And then there's that moment. It was the saddest part to me is where he says, come. And Elliot says, stay. Like, that's not what this is. I have to go. You have to stay.
That's not our home.
That's not, but now you're forever changed. Now go live it. Like, go. Like, that was kind of his commission. You've been forever changed. And I love that was the end of the movie. Like, they didn't have to show like, what was life like tomorrow?
10 years later.
They just.
Elliot entered rehab.
Like, he's in a psych ward. No, really,
I saw this guy.
But
Keys and the mom ended up getting married and having 4 more kids.
Right. But just how much it impacted everybody in that scene. And even a lot of the kids who their hearts were turned. But again, what turned it? It's like, and we get to be a part of this adventure with an alien and we fly like.
We're going to get chased by the cops. Sure.
Sure.
Sign me up.
But that's what God's inviting us into, is that story where he's saying, look, I've come from heaven to earth and then I went back, but I'm leaving this story that you can continue on and keep it going because, but you have to live it from a changed mind and a changed heart. That's what I got from the end of the movie. And he did it with light, again, with light. His finger lit up and he hit his forehead. Like your thinking has changed. Your thinking has to change because I can't go back. Now that I know this other world exists, what can I do? Like, I can't deny it anymore, which is kind of where Elliot is. But it leads to adventure and it's not always fun, right? Going through the death and the grief and
it's painful. Yeah.
All the stuff that they went through in the movie. Just like Alan Arnold says, like, that's part of story too, as well. Like, you're also going to be entering into pain that you wouldn't have chosen to, probably. And the pain of others, the pain of grief, of watching people walk away when you love them. I mean, there's all sorts of grief and pain in sorrow like Jesus did. He was a man of sorrows, but he's also anointed with joy, far above anyone else. And that's the story that the characters in the movie found and participated in, each to their own degree. Even the older brother jerk, even the mom, like they all participated in it by the end. And that's what he's doing with us. And by the end of it, I texted Paul and I was like, he stole from the Bible. He just stole the whole story from the.
It's almost what we talk about with this podcast, that every great story steals its power from the gospel.
Right.
And I like that. I'm really glad Britt left me the final thing. And what I want to say about the story too, the story one is predictable. It's obvious. Typically it's formulaic, but there's 3 M's of the second story. Mystery. We don't know what's going to happen, but we sort of expect a miracle. Expect Jesus to show up and something supernatural to happen. And then the other part is it's always going to be messy. There's always, even look at Jesus' life, as you mentioned, through the Gospels, it's messy. Whether it's dirty, just from the fact that he talks about not having a home, but being surrounded by people, the mess of Lazarus and Mary and Martha, and the fact that, hears about Lazarus being sick, so he waits 2 more days to leave. That's messy, right? It's messy to be leaving. It's messy to touch a leper. Literally it's unclean, because typically when unclean touches clean, the clean becomes unclean. But Jesus flips that and he's like, no, when I touch unclean, going back to the glowy finger, when I touch the unclean becomes clean. And the last line of the movie, which if you don't tear up, you're dead inside. I'll be right here.
Yeah.
And that's the promise. Like, Jesus may be gone. Yeah, he is. Maybe not maybe. That's probably. He's in heaven. He's a fair place for us. There's a whole other cool Jewish bridegroom story and tradition with that's super powerful to think about, that we're not going to get into today. But I'll be right here. And that's what Jesus says is, I'll be right here. I've left you the comforter, Spirit. Talked a lot about living in the Spirit, being in union with the Spirit, because the Spirit connects us with Jesus and Jesus connects us to the Father. And that's how the impossible becomes possible. Is through that connection, through the union with Christ, through deeper union. Because the more we become connected, the less it becomes about tradition, tasks, formula, smaller story. And the more our eyes are open to the wonder that's around us, wonder of Jesus, the mystery, the miracles, and the mess. This world we live in is a mess.
Yeah. But
we're called to bring Jesus, to bring the light, to become the healing touch, the world around us.
Yeah. And in the movie, that doesn't disconnect people from each other. It connects them, right? Like, I don't want to make it sound like it's so mystical we're not aware of what's going on around us. It just filters it from a different perspective. And now we can enter the mess. Like you said, with Jesus at Lazarus' grave, it would have been much cleaner for him to just show up and heal him, and he never died.
Or not even show up. He healed people from a long range 3-pointer.
All right.
He healed.
But he allowed a mess to take place so he could come into the mess and reveal something much bigger. And light shines in the darkness, right? There's a great light that shines in the darkness, and darkness can't do anything, and mess can't do anything, because the darkness doesn't have substance. It's the light that has substance. And so, yeah.
And it's what you said earlier. Our response, Jesus, is God doesn't know, or he knows and doesn't care.
Right.
What if our response in those situations was, did this so that through this mess, he can clean it up? The disciples, was it this, they see a blind guy? Was it his parents or this guy that sinned and made him blind? Like, neither. They did nothing wrong. But this guy's been blind for decades, but so that the glory of God can be revealed.
Well, and let's make it really practical about what's going on, at least in our country right now. There's 9% inflation, high, all kind of stuff going on, a division, people hating on each other.
It's a mess.
It's a mess. But I'm telling you, there's a way forward where we are a light in the midst of that, where we reveal that we're from another world. But it's not going to happen by using the same tools that everybody else is using. We have. It's
not going to happen with narrative exposition telling.
It's not going to happen with, let me tell you about the gospel. Like part of it is showing the gospel. Part of it is revealing the gospel. And this is the light. And and you have to go and engage the mess. And God has allowed it for whatever reason, but it definitely is an opportunity. And I believe, and I have seen, as I've seen time and time again, the church, the people of God have resources during these times that, where did they come from? I know where they came from, but they used those resources to help others and chose to, instead of constricting and hiding and not engaging the world, even in their own pain, being fatherless and the guys in Mexico or whatever, like even in their own pain, they try to help others. They try to further the big story. And they got such a blessing out of that. That's why I love that the movie ends right there. It would have ruined it to go any further, because the movie was so powerful. You had no doubt their lives were changed the rest of the way. And that's what we can do.
Light shines brightest in the dark. So this has been Paul McDonald and Britt Mooney talking about E.T., the extraterrestrial, just in case you wondered what E.T. stands for. It's right there on the poster. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the summer blockbuster series. If you're wondering, well, wait, what about your YouTube channel? Well, Britt and I are recording together here in the same room. We don't have the video capability. Paul hasn't figured that out yet. Britt's working on it on his own jam, but he's working to get together to figure that stuff out. But we don't want to leave you hanging. So there is a special one-off. I talked to Sarah Daniels, who did the Terminator podcast with me. She's got The Last Starfighter. We've got that episode coming up soon. She and I talked about E.T., why she loved it, her favorite scene, but more importantly, her least favorite scene. So it's a powerful, pretty short conversation for being as kind of powerful and as touching some of those deep spots as it did. So check it out. Go to our YouTube channel at Men at the Movies. And Sarah and I are going to talk about E.T. on that, because we didn't want to leave you hanging here at the end of July. So enjoy your summer. Britt and I are going to go head out on the lake. Catch some waves, not surfing. And hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?